Welcome. Welcome to the Protestant Academy in Frankfurt. We are delighted that you found your way to this wonderful place, downtown in Frankfurt, the Panoramasaal of the Protestant Academy. I particularly welcome the delegation from the Near East School of Theology from Beirut, Lebanon. Thank you for your time to share with us insights on the current situation of interfaith dialogues in Lebanon. Thank you for getting up very early this morning in Beirut, and this is now your first real public talk, so thank you for coming. The Near East School of Theology, as many of you know, the abbreviation is NEST, is a theological academic institution that is actively involved in interfaith dialogue between Christians and Muslims. Tonight we will discuss how this interfaith dialogue is possible in the current political situation. Particularly, we want to discuss the ways in which we can overcome self-images of being victimized or being a victim. I particularly want to welcome Professor Dr. Martin Accad. Thank you for speaking to us on behalf of the Near East School of Theology in Beirut. As Protestant Academy in Frankfurt, we thought it would be great to also hear about the reality of Lebanese diaspora in our region. So I welcome Pater Gaby Geagea, who is Catholic priest and head of the Maronite mission in Frankfurt. Gaby is right in the back. And we have other speakers, and you will see who will talk to us, and you also are invited to take part in our talks. This is why we are not sitting like very, very conservative, but more in a discussion way. So, bienvenue à tous, et merci de votre présence ce soir ici. Thank you all for joining us tonight. A special thanks goes to my colleague Andreas Goetze, who, together with the colleagues from Evangelical Mission in Solidarity, has organized this encounter. Andreas, may I now ask you to introduce us to the panel and the program for tonight.
Thank you very much, Annegret. Thank you for a warm welcome. Also, welcome to all who are with us through the live stream. Also, welcome. Thank you for you from the Near East School of Theology who are with us. This interconfessional Protestant seminary, the oldest Protestant theology school in the Middle East, founded and formed in 1932. It trains pastors and religious education teachers for the Armenian Protestant, the Anglican, the Presbyterian and Lutheran churches and other evangelical organizations in the Middle East. It welcomes international students who have special interest in Eastern churches as well as ecumenical and interreligious dialogues in the Middle Eastern context. And it enables a study program for pastors from abroad like me. In 2007, I had the opportunity to study at NEST myself. And I can say that this has had a great influence in my lifetime. And since then, I came several times to Beirut and to the Nest. Over the course of almost 100 years, a broad network of ecumenical relationships, partnerships, and even more friendships have developed across all borders. We are so glad that you are with us today and the following days. Just to mention who is with us, I will say the names. Professor Martin Accad, President of the Nest and part of the faculty. Professor Wimma Nasella van Zane, Academic Dean and part of the faculty. Professor Johnny Awad, Professor for New Testament and part of the faculty. Mathilde Sabach, Presbyterian female pastor, former student at Nest and from Syria. Where you are? Oh, okay. We here can see you. You're on a live stream, have just my voice. Saba Kara, Master of Divinity student from Palestine, Nablus from, yeah, where he is? Ah, George Sahili, also Master of Divinity student, Armenian Church of Syria. Where are you? Oh, all right. And Petra Antun, Arabic online diploma student from Syria. Also welcome. Thank you very much. My name is Andreas Goetze. I'm working in the field of interreligious dialogue and Near and Middle East issues together with my colleague Dr. Peter Noss at the Ecumenical Center in Frankfurt. And this is an institution of two evangelical churches, the church in Hessen and Nassau and the church of Kurhessen and Waldeck. And we promote to develop ecumenical theology, are looking for its practical implementation in our two churches. And we are very thankful you were speaking about this, Dr. Anneke Chilling and Dr. Helle Betzold from the Protestant Academy, very much for the wonderful cooperation and hospitality. And I also like to thank Dr. Uwe Gräbe from the Evangelical Mission in Solidarity in Stuttgart for his great cooperation in bringing all of us together in this evening and for this evening, and of course the next days in Bochum, in Kassel, and also in Erfurt. We are now looking forward to the lecture of Professor Accad. We are very honored and delighted that you are with us this evening. In September 2024, Dr. Accad took office as president of the NIE School of Theology. He has made intensive efforts, both academically and practically, to promote Christian-Muslim dialogue in Lebanon. What better place for this than Nest? And after his lecture, we will have a short comment from Pater Gaby, from the mission of Maronites in Germany, as well as a commentary by Professor Wimma Nasella, and from George, from a women perspective and a youth perspective. Allow me to say a few words of introduction. Lebanon, this beautiful land of cedars, full of pain and beauty. Lebanon has a rich and diverse history, diverse politically and religiously, and also diverse and rich experiences in encounter between Christians and Muslims. Lebanon and the whole region is not at peace. The souls are wounded, burdened. The grief and pain is never ending. In Lebanon, in Israel, especially in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, Palestine. There are hardly any prospects, whether ecumenic or politically. Rifts, mistrust, distrust are everywhere. We ask about perspectives for this maltreated country. And we ask how a Christian-Islamic dialogue could continue under these traumatic conditions. If everyone sees themselves as a victim, there will be no way to achieve reconciliation and take responsibility. The widespread victim narratives that have been strong through centuries only see the other as an enemy, and the world being divided into we and them. Together with Professor Accad, we discuss how it is possible to overcome this self-image of being a victim and how to engage in dialogue. But now and first, a warm welcome to Martin Accad, Professor of Islam and Christian-Muslim Relations and President of the Near East School of Theology in Beirut. Martin, the floor is yours.
Guten Abend und vielen Dank. And next time I learn how to say for organizing this evening. I couldn't thank everyone who's behind this week that we will spend in Germany one by one, but they have been named, and so I want to join my voice in thanking you all for making this possible. the title of my talk tonight is Christians and Muslims Beyond Victimization, a case study from Lebanon. I'm going to skip certain parts to try and make it a little bit shorter, and hopefully it will continue to make sense. Our world seems to be stuck in victimhood narratives. Christians in the Muslim world often feel that they're victims of persecution and minoritization. Muslims in the West feel that they are victims of Islamophobia. Jews feel that they are victims of anti-Semitism. Christians and right-wing political parties in Europe, North America, and Australia feel that their societies and cultures are being taken over by Islam. In the US, the dominant voice seeks to make America great again, nurturing a culture of xenophobia with the underlying sense that America has lost its greatness due to some overwhelming flow of immigrants. Israel is dominated by a narrative of self-protectionism. Palestinians have all but lost any hope for an independent state in Palestine. Are any of these narratives objectively true? There are certainly elements of truth in each. These fears are not just sentiments. They're the result of historical experiences. The narratives of fear are the result of the behavior of extremists in each of our communities who have been a real source of danger and have inflicted wounds on others. As a historian of ideas, I view myself also as an archaeologist of narratives, an archaeologist who excavates the collective memories of fearful communities. I believe in the importance of narratives, yet from a multi-narratival perspective, I would argue that the objective truth, between quotation marks, the objective truth of a perception matters less than its impact on a community. Collective narratives reflect a community's shared memory. They shape a community's self-perception and therefore its identity. And from this identity, communities relate to others in certain ways. Narratives of victimhood, which make us less willing to take responsibility for our past and present actions, obstruct dialogue and reconciliation. Victim narratives lead to the other always being seen as the enemy and the world being divided into us and them. During our time together today, we will look at Lebanon as a case study where narratives of victimhood have given birth to deep-seated sectarianism, leading to decades of conflict, violence, and war. After surveying initially Lebanon's founding constitution and recent history, and I'll do that briefly for time, we will look at how victimhood narratives have made their way into the church, both in the Muslim world increasingly outside of it. We will then search for new avenues for the development of a theology of Islam, a missiology, and a public and political theology that can challenge the status quo. In closing, I will describe how Nest has been and will seek increasingly to be a source of healing for the sectarianism of Lebanon and a resource for the global church. We want to champion new ways of living together as communities of faith that transform our societies in search for the common good. The Lebanese Constitution says that the Lebanese state is a civil state at its core. The preamble to the Constitution of May 23, 1926 says Lebanon is a parliamentary democratic republic based on respect for public liberties, especially the freedom of opinion and belief, and respect for social justice and equality of rights and duties among all citizens without discrimination. Many other elements in the Constitution want to guarantee this equal citizenship for everyone. In Article 9, we read, there shall be absolute freedom of conscience. So in addition to equality in rights before the law, freedom of conscience. The state, in rendering homage to God Almighty, shall respect all religions and creeds, and shall guarantee under its protection the free exercise of all religious rights, provided that public order is not disturbed. It shall also guarantee that the personal status and religious interests of the population, to whatever religious sect they belong, shall be respected. This is quite a unique constitution for our region, but also globally, where there is a blending of religious rights with civil rights and duties and responsibilities. Next year, in 2026, we should be celebrating 100 years since the establishment of this pact. When our founders dreamt up the state of Lebanon with these lofty words that I've read to you, the intention was clearly to establish a just civil state based on religious pluralism and equal opportunity for all citizens. Nevertheless, this well-designed framework did not prevent the Lebanese sporadically and with alarming recurrence to give in to violence, to cycles of violence. The latest nationwide example of which is referred to as the Lebanese Civil War of 1975 to 1990. So through what is referred to as a gentleman agreement in Lebanon, the position of President of the Republic has been assigned to the Maronite community, the position of Prime Minister to the Sunni Muslim community, and the Speaker of Parliament has always been a Shiite Muslim. The sectarian system that was set up in Lebanon as a modern nation state has clearly failed in ensuring the equal rights and citizenship of the diverse communities in our pluralist society, which it was meant to ensure. This has led to protracted conflicts at various times. Proportional representation is effectively regulated by the electoral law, which becomes cause for tensions before general elections every 4 years. In practice, the Constitution, which was meant to ensure religious pluralism, coexistence, and equal citizenship, ends up being regulated by electoral laws, reflecting a deeply flawed sectarian mindset. The sectarian-driven demographics are the worst enemy of justice and civility. They have proven to lead to endemic corruption and to ruinous consequences for state institutions. In practice, Lebanon is governed by a cartel-like distribution of state resources and assets among sectarian leaders to the detriment of all citizens. Furthermore, and on a regular basis, deep xenophobia, driven by fear of demographic disbalance and loss of power, settles into the day-to-day mindset and lived practice of a majority of Lebanese citizens. For instance, it was the fear of resettlement of Palestinian refugees, which were mostly Sunnis, that drove the Maronites of Lebanon to arm their young people into militias in the early 1970s. These same worries have more recently been clearly present in Christian and some non-Christian minds vis-à-vis Syrian refugees. Always the sectarian affiliation plays an important role in the position of the Lebanese communities. Thus, driven by fear and distrust, Lebanon has been dominated soon after its inception by what is often referred to as political Maronitism until 1975, which is referring to Maronite dominance of politics. The Maronites are the largest Christian group in Lebanon. political Sunnism in the post-war 1990s and until 2006, and then political Shi'ism since the widely perceived victory of Hezbollah over Israel in 2006 summer war, at least in the Arab imagination, and until very recently. I'll skip some reflections on the Ta'if Accord, which came on the aftermath of the civil war to try and address sectarianism. And the intent was that through the creation of a second chamber and that they would desectarianize parliament. This is 35 years ago, and the Ta'if Agreement has still not been implemented except a very small proportion of it because of these sectarian, deeply rooted fears. In light of the preceding background, we have to ask, what is the role of the Church in restoring a just civil state? We want to avoid the Messiah complex that believes that we are the only hope for Lebanon's redemption. But we want to ask, what part can and should we play in contributing to the common good? In my view, there are two important obstacles to this goal. One is our theology of Islam, and the second is our political and public missiology. I'll address each of these for a little bit. Our theology of Islam has often lacked nuance. Whenever we say Islam is this, Islam is that, we're not doing justice to the diversity and complexity in Islam. If you'll allow me for a moment to essentialize Protestantism, a thing which I warn against, essentializing, and to use the labels of liberal and conservative, let me reflect a little bit. In the more liberal circles of Protestantism, we tend to minimize our differences. Steeped in a tradition of ecumenism and interfaith dialogue, we want to work for the good of our societies and prefer to focus on a dialogue of life rather than on theological dialogue. We hear the moderate and pleasant discourse of some Muslim leaders in the West or in Lebanon or more recently in the Gulf region, and we affirm with them, Islam means peace. In the more conservative evangelical circles, we often seek to emphasize difference. In this tradition, evangelism and the mission of conversion have largely taken precedence over the social gospel, ecumenism, and dialogue. Unfortunately, our evangelical strategies or our evangelistic strategies have often relied on the portrayal of the fallenness of the world as a stepping stone for the saving and transformative power of the gospel. We think that the worse we make the world look, the more the gospel can shine. The worse we describe Islam, the better Christianity looks. We think that we need to bring out everything negative that we see in Islam and its history to justify the proclamation of the gospel. But does the gospel as God's good news not stand in and of itself, rather than on the rubbles of any other belief or ideology? I believe that it should, and that it does. Must one choose then between evangelism and dialogue? Can we instead view these two functions as part of the diversity of the Holy Spirit's gifts to the Church? This is something that I believe to be true. In my own life, I've navigated between the two at different seasons, and as I have been called by God to different types of ministries and responsibilities. As far as possible, I believe that we should embody all those types of ministries, both as individuals, if possible, but certainly as the collective body of Christ. Next, I want to connect two concepts, public theology and missiology. Missiology is really about the church's interfacing with the world. But that too is the meaning of public theology. Missiology, when understood holistically, is really public theology. And public theology, when done with the purpose of witnessing to the transforming power of God, is missiology. So for this public missiology, I want to highlight two problems and perhaps through them bring out some of the elephants in the room. It is a problem when our public missiology is driven by fear and a sense of victimhood, one of self-minoritization. Historically, Middle East Christians have often portrayed themselves as victims. Some ascribe their suffering to Islam and Muslims, others to Zionism and Israel. Don't get me wrong, both forms of suffering are very real, historically and today. But when we view ourselves primarily through the prism of victimhood, our public response ceases to be missiological and becomes political power play. We start looking for allies who can protect us from our persecutors rather than partners who will stand with us in faith through suffering. Secondly, it's a problem when our public missiology is constructed along partisan lines. A similar phenomenon to the minority complex and sense of victimhood is also increasingly noticeable in Western church circles. During the centuries when Christianity had transformed into Christendom, that is from the 4th century, from the Edict of Milan and into the 20th, when the church could proudly claim to have constructed and to be part of a so-called Judeo-Christian culture, it looked outward because perhaps it felt safe and strong. Often it used its sense of power and strength for the advancement of political agendas rather than God's kingdom, for conquest, crusades, colonization. In the past few decades, as Western societies have become increasingly secularized, the church in the West has felt increasingly weak and small. In self-protectionism, we notice a rise in partisan politics within the church. It is the church looking for political allies rather than for partners and supporters through suffering. So clearly, the phenomena of partisan politics and the sense of victimhood are both negative expressions of public missiology, and they are both present at various times, both in the Western and the Eastern Church. How do we address these challenges? How do the values of the home of God, which is a term introduced by Miroslav Volf as an alternative to the kingdom of God, how do the values of the home of God, such as respect for human dignity and being children of peace, contribute positively to social well-being? 20 years ago, as I began to work in Lebanon, I quickly realized that when we engage in dialogue in the evangelical world, and I come from a more conservative side of the Protestant traditions in Lebanon, we easily risk being boxed into one of two extremes: syncretism on one end and polemics at the other end. I then proceeded to place those two positions on either extremes of a dialogical spectrum and provided other positions on that line, which I now call the CCUP spectrum of Christian-Muslim interaction, which is an acronym for syncretistic or syncretism, existential, charismatic, apologetic, and polemical. There's no time for a full explanation of the spectrum. If you want the full explanation, come to Lebanon for SEMO. But I've written much about it in the past years. I retain the following reflections for today's purpose. The more conservative perspective or side of the evangelical world will read your investment into interfaith dialogue as a compromise on the gospel. I've very often been accused of compromise. They will accuse you of loving Muslims too much, if you can imagine that, or of selling out to the Muslim ideology of submission. A right-wing Jewish scholar, Battier, who became a darling of right-wing evangelical ideologues, even coined a word for it, dimitude. I don't know if it's made its way into your circles. The category of Ahl al-Dhimma, originally a legal term in Islamic jurisprudence whose purpose is to guarantee the protection of Jewish and Christian minorities under Islamic rule, is reduced by Battier to an intentional process of minoritization and humiliation, which she calls dimitude. Evangelical scholars such as, at one time, Patrick Suchdeo, and more recently an Australian Mark Dury, have popularized the concept among evangelicals through their writings translated into more than a dozen languages. But anyone familiar with how Islamic texts function and with the adaptionist nature of Islamic law through the process of jurisprudence or fiqh will recognize the reductionist intent behind this argument. The concept of dimitude, as presented by these scholars, is a travesty of the truth that ignores both interfaith history and the methodologies of jurisprudence. On the more liberal side of the Protestant world, scholars often want you to give up on evangelism and the benefit of dialogue. Witnessing to your Christian convictions is subsumed under the dirty word of proselytism. But I would argue that any form of human conversation is an attempt at convincing. Without a desire on both sides of a conversation to convince the other of one's ideas, there is no human interaction. Even as each of us today will share our opinions, we will be attempting to convince each other of our point of view, as I am doing right now in my discourse to you. The question then is not whether witness and evangelism are admissible or not. Rather, as you listen to me today, you will need to judge my discourse based on whether I'm able to present to you my argument without manipulation or coercion, which otherwise would be a form of violence unfit for children of the home of God. I would argue that one can be academically critical without being polemical. The one that is academically critical is motivated by a collaborative search for the truth, while the other, polemical, is driven by a desire to destroy another's ideas in order to replace them with one's own. I've invested much of the last 20 years of my teaching, writing, and practice on fleshing out the meaning of the central position on the spectrum, the charismatic. The charismatic approach is a way of avoiding the extremes, of focusing on Christ rather than Christianity, of exploring the prophetic stance of Jesus vis-à-vis religions generally to adopt it as our own. It consists in finding peace with our religious identity as a social construct while embracing a supra-religious identity and attitude centered on God in Christ rather than on the religious institution. The charismatic navigates the path of respect and humility, gentleness and kindness, while adopting the tools of a critical mind, always seeking the truth. The charismatic approach accepts that the diversity of ministries, from evangelism to church planting to humanitarian work to political engagement to peace building and so on, are all needed expressions of the global church's multi-gifted and multi-calling contribution to God's redemptive work and building of his family and dwelling on earth. Finally, the kerygma of and as Christ projects a vision for redemption and liberation from self-glorification, from religion that dominates and manipulates, from religious behavior that strips others of their human dignity. Christ's Kerygma offers us a vision for the common good, enacted through a holistic, multi-faith and ecumenical engagement with society through the values he taught and manifested in his own life. And below, I will give a few pointers for how we might begin to do this. We adopt a charismatic approach to Islam when we develop a nuanced theology of Islam that gives adequate attention to its complexity and diversity. These two characteristics apply to all religions and worldviews. We recognize diversity in Islam when we realize that widely different manifestations of the religion all claim to be rooted in Quranic verses, traditions, and practices traced back to the religion's founder himself. We recognize the complexity when we realize that diverse claimants to authenticity have legitimate cause to do so. The question becomes not so much whether Islam is a religion of peace or violence anymore, but rather about what causes religious adherents to turn to violence or peace. The question is also not only about which religious scriptures or verses inspire violence, but also how violence and conflicts continuously shape religion and scripture interpretation. Christians, and particularly evangelicals, except perhaps in some sizable US circles, consider that the church should not be involved in politics. They understand politics as a dirty word and prefer to stay out of the public realm altogether. But I want to propose that there is a difference between politics and partisanship. Partisan politics is something that the Bible warns us against. It is a form of idolatry, where individuals would be willing to stay loyal to an authority, even if that authority ceases to represent that constituency's values or principles. Because partisan politics can cause conflict within the church has often claimed to stay out of politics. But if we take politics to mean the investment into the well-being of individuals and communities in public life, then politics should be the principal occupation of the church. Thus, we need a robust public and political theology. As an expression of its political investment, the church is called to be more active in peace building. And these days, this means countering the dominant narratives of sectarian division. In Lebanon and the Middle East, the manifestation of sectarian division is fairly obvious. But how is sectarianism manifest in Germany? Is your political system willing to share power with rising elements in your society that are seeking more representation in national decision-making? Will you seek to protect the socio-political construct of a so-called Judeo-Christian culture? Or will you pursue the democratic principle of equal representation for all, regardless of demographic size? Some scholars in recent decades have called for the recognition of a Judeo-Christian Islamic culture. But is the solution to religious diversity the multiplication of sectarian distinction, or the search for a common national trajectory that recognizes pluralism without setting it on an idolatrous pedestal? In Matthew 5:9, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." This is one of the rare places in the Gospels where Jesus encapsulates the identity of child of God into a single activity. There are some among you who are called specifically to the ministry of peace. You may be called to lead and facilitate the navigation of the constructs described above. Perhaps the Lebanese experience has something to offer in this area. For one thing, the definition of social identity through religious categories has not helped us. The tendency of religious ideology to seek dominance has led to deep sectarian divisions, despite a decent constitutional system that sought to ensure equality for all, as we've seen. After 100 years of experimentation with political Maronitism, political Sunnism, political Shiism, the uprising that began in 2019 has been seeking a return to the founding intent of Lebanon as a state through the establishment of a just civil state. As we seek to promote the model and teaching of Jesus' values, our understanding of the gospel will emphasize human dignity and our common humanity as a safeguard against religious dominance expressed through sectarianism. For Christians in Lebanon and the Middle East, the victimhood narrative has often led to the loss of a sense of belonging. When Christians view themselves as minorities, always victims of their environment, they lose the ability to form a vision for change. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann describes the ministry of the church as prophetic imagination. It is the ability to wield the dual role of criticizing and energizing equally. Criticism is an act carried out from within, where dominant reality is never allowed to become the object of idolatry, where elements in our in-group that denigrate human dignity are called out and criticized with courage and resilience. But without the prophetic act of energizing, criticism becomes nihilistic. Energizing in the prophetic imagination is made possible through the gift of amazement. It is when we acquire the ability to be amazed by the good that others can bring to our own group that we begin to construct an alternative view to dominant reality, one that challenges the dominant powers of fear and self-protectionism and works with others who are different from us in the construction of a common good that contributes to societies of peace. We realize that we have allies among other ethnic and religious groups. We realize that most of us have a desire for human dignity. We realize that we are many that abhor the dehumanizing outcome of power that dominates and subjugates. Then we realize that we are not a minority. Though we may be demographically small as a religious group, we are able to reframe our identity within a redefinition of who we are in partnership with others around and around shared values that we may call citizenship. Through this reframing, we deminoritize our self-understanding, our attitudes, and eventually our behavior. We are able to project a new vision of hope and carve a space for ourselves and our community within a broader understanding of a shared society with shared values. This is the starting point for the construction of a theology of staying, the foundation that the church in difficult contexts needs to become active in political life. Finally, some practical ways forward. The Near East School of Theology is strategically located at the heart of the Hamra district of Beirut, between three of the top universities in the country. Our history stretches back nearly 200 years when Protestant missionaries began their work in the Levant. The original drive of missionaries to set up institutions that would transform society through education and healthcare has been well fulfilled. But we have come to the point where we are suffering from the result of a highly educated youth which is unable to find a future for itself in an intensely sectarian region governed by deeply corrupt political partisanship. This leads to the well-documented phenomenon of brain drain. NEST is currently seeking to set up a center that balances research and practice a center for advanced research and public engagement. We want to help our youth to integrate their professional learning and skills into a holistic biblical framework, connecting faith with daily life. Such a holistic formation will help them develop a new vision and mission for their role as agents of change in their own society, rather than simply becoming experts in a narrow discipline competing with their global peers. Secondly, through my work in public affairs with a strong focus on Lebanon's conflict history, I've discovered the importance of multi-narrativity for dialogue and peace building. When we excavate competing narratives on a common event, we give voice to conflicting parties. Allowing for multiple narratives does not mean accepting them as equal. It means recognizing that they represent the truth for each community that owns them, and as such that they play a key role in shaping community identity and perception of the other. By holding competing narratives in tension, we intentionally avoid synthesis, whereby all narratives become diluted and meaningless to all conflicting parties. We also avoid the judgment that one narrative is more correct than the other, which leads to championing one narrative and erasing the other, a process which only protracts conflict and pushes it off until it re-emerges in the future. This is the history of Lebanon. The multiple narratives approach is a lens that contributes to peace and well-being, both in the historical political realm and in the realm of interfaith dialogue. It is when we allow room for the other religious discourse that we gain permission to express our own. You'll recognize this if you are involved in interfaith dialogue. Dialogue based on multi-narrativity cultivates empathy, humility, active listening, and other such values, which ultimately are the best tools to construct an emotionally mature society that can work collaboratively for the construction of a common future. Finally, the sort of engagement I've described in the above section requires a high level of religious literacy for all parties involved. As a theological seminary with a long history of interfaith and ecumenical engagement, NEST has cultivated a culture of equality and freedom in its teaching and other activities. As societies both in the MENA and increasingly in Europe, North America, Australia, and other parts of the so-called Western world experience increasing division, sectarianism, and conflict, NEST is well positioned to lead the way in cultivating religious literacy among and between the diverse communities in Lebanon, the region, and the world. Religious literacy emphasizes complexity and diversity, countering essentialist tendencies and agendas. Through a Center for Advanced Research and Public Engagement, we can consolidate and grow our voice in public and political theology. We can facilitate top-notch research in collaboration with global scholars, organize conferences, consultations, special seminars and workshops, and formational tracks for pastors, lay leaders, and more broadly in the community. We can design special diplomas that equip faith leaders and communities to work not only toward more resilient societies, but through what I have learned to call adversity-activated development. Societies that mature in religious literacy do not only resist conflict with resilience, but more than that, they learn to leverage adversity to move their communities towards hope, freedom, maturity, and peace. This is public theology at its best. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your lecture, and we have just to think about my mind and heart what you said. So, but before speaking on tables. We just want to have some comments. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Pater Gaby. Please come to me here in the front. Pater Gaby is the head of a Maronite mission in Germany, living in Frankfurt. And the Maronite mission in Frankfurt is an important contact point for Arabic-speaking Christians, especially those from the Middle East who have fled to Germany due to conflicts such as the Syrian war. The mission offers spiritual support, church services in Arabic, and practical help and services as a place of fellowship, and in exchange for Maronite Christians as well as other Arab believers. Pater Gaby, what particularly moved you when you listened to the lecture?
Well, first, thank you, Mr. Accad, for this wonderful lecture. I remembered like many years ago when I went to the Near East School of Theology, and I enjoyed hearing many good conferences. And actually, when I heard him, I said to myself, well, it's difficult to tell a real victim that you are not allowed to understand yourself, your history, your existence, only as a victim, if you want to be healed, if you want to be free. It is difficult, but it is crucial, decisive, to tell it, to say that you cannot only see yourself as a victim if you want to be free. If you always make others responsible for your destiny, so you are giving others your freedom. So that's something I heard in his narrative and his way of speaking. And most of all, I liked his idea about the charismatic approach, and this critical but not polemical. So that's what I liked when he said, for example, about judging the survival mechanism, but at the same time he gave perspective how to convert them, how to convert such mechanism while understanding that these communities, different communities, they need to survive. And most of all, what I like to that each religion has to seek of finding, most of all we Christians, finding peace with our own religious identity. The thing I heard a little bit, I don't know if I understood him well, with a different point of view. It's about the dilemma, evangelism or dialogue. From a European point of view, it's been like now 20 years I live in Europe. The most important question is about tolerance. How can I communicate with the other in a way to give him his right to exist with me and to ask for my right of existing with him? It's not about asking, shall I give him the gospel or not? It's about a civil right, his and mine, to coexist together and our differences.
So we might discuss this furthermore. What is the aims of evangelism and of the dialogue? And maybe there are two sides of one medal or not, and how there's relationship of both.
Excellent. I liked very much when he said about the political theology. I agree with him. I couldn't say it in a better way. Like Richard Rohr, actually, he says the gospel is a political project. We mostly forget about this, we Christians. What is politics if it's not about freedom, about dignity, about liberation? What is politics? So we always do as Christians as if politics is not something that has to do with the gospel. This is something I really like, I appreciate. Yeah.
Since 15 years you are living now in Germany, and you are working as a head of a Maronite mission in Germany. How do you see the situation in Lebanon and the Christian-Muslim dialogue? Somehow from far away, but on the other hand, in midst.
Well, as you said, it's been a long time that I'm abroad, but how I see things in the news, how I see things in different discussions, in my observations, first of all, I come back to what Mr. Accad said. We need a new theology of Islam, our way of understanding Islam and speaking with Islam. And we can speak about common mistakes we are making. For example, this culture of martyrdom. When you are a victim, Maronites were victim, Shiites were victim. It's about how you speak about your history. If you speak about your history only with trauma, without converting this trauma, then you will never be able to heal. Or if you speak about martyrdom, this is something we always criticize Hezbollah about, only to diffuse this idea of giving up your life without celebrating life. This is not a perspective that heals. And it's not only about confrontation, it's also about sometimes accepting that we have to live next to each other without really mixing with each other in some things, in some manners. And this is a great deal that Lebanon should and can learn from Germany, how decentralization can build unity. Germany took very long time to celebrate and to enjoy peace in between different confessions. And this realization as a system, as a political system, helped so much getting to this point. This is something the Lebanese can and should do. We cannot force things. Sometimes some societies, they are ahead, some others, they are busy with other questions. So why you want to force them all to live within the same administration and on things that concerns their daily life? This is something very important that Lebanese can learn from Germany, for example.
Thank you very much, Padre Gaby, for your comment to your lecture. We will discuss it furthermore. Thank you very much for this time now. And just I want to invite Wimma. Wimma Nasella. Pardon? Yeah. She's professor for practical theology at NIA School of Theology, with a special focus on the situation of women in the country. I would like to ask you for a comment, what you heard, and maybe give another view about the situation in Lebanon, the sectarian situation, about dialogue and mission with women, or how women deal, Muslim women, Christian women. Are there any relations? What are your impressions?
Yeah. Well, I didn't prepare a lecture for tonight.
No, of course not.
Muslim relations is not really my place. But what I can say is, from a perspective of women, this whole conflict between Muslims and Christians, Islam and Christianity, most of the time it's either a conflict of power between a lot of men, or it is men cooperating with each other to grab more power for themselves. And what we notice on the ground is that most of the time the victims out of this is the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable are the women. And the women are experiencing, Muslim women and Christian women are experiencing these conflicts almost in the same way. Women in the Middle East are experiencing the loss of their homes, the loss of their children, the loss of their livelihood. They are the victims of violence, domestic violence, when things escalate in countries of war. They are the ones who need to patch things up and find creative solutions to keep their families running. And one image comes to my mind when we were talking now, and also when I'm thinking about women in this in the context of such conflict, is the parable of the persistent widow that Jesus told in Luke 18, when Jesus was speaking about a judge who did not fear God nor cared what men thought or said. very much like most of the politicians we have in Lebanon, who do not fear God and do not care what people say or think, whether in Lebanon or I would also say in Syria, what they had in the old regime, what they have now in the new regime, and what Palestinians are experiencing, men in power who don't care. And these are the people who are causing, I would say, victims, left and right, women, and all the unimportant people, all the more vulnerable people, such as the disabled and the children, and those who are on the margin, and the migrants and the refugees. And these are the people who pay the price for the guys who either fight over religion or cooperate in order to abuse and take advantage of their citizens. And in the middle of this, you have these persistent widows. And I think we see them every day and everywhere in our society. These persistent widows, these women who over and over again, and the parable of in Luke says, she keeps coming back and asking, give me my justice against my enemy. And I think I hear this every day from moms, from single women, from widows, and from people in the margin, from migrant women who are living in Lebanon and working in Lebanon. Give me my justice. And I think one way also to fight victimhood is also to keep insisting and keep naming and keep exposing those who are abusing their power in the face of the small people.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Wimma. Yeah, this is also a question of vulnerability, to see this and have a focus on this perspective. Who is more wounded or is effective that people are against them working and no one is seeing them or counting them. So thank you very much. And last but not least, George, I would like to introduce you as an Armenian evangelical Christian from Syria, studying at NEUC. Come to us. Huh? From Lebanon? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay. As a lot of families, it's a bit between. Just would like to ask you about your perspective as a young guy, youth perspective of victimisation. It means in 2011, we had a big demonstration with concert in Lebanon, and I have since then a T-shirt with one sentence here, Khalas. They want to stop this. The young guys were really fed up with everything and had this T-shirt, Khalas. What is about this Khalas nowadays? Just speaking.
Okay. So, as you said, youth are tired in Lebanon. They are tired in the Middle East in general, maybe. But since we're talking about Lebanon, it tires me also as a young person who wants to dedicate his life to ministry and to staying in the country and maybe doing his best to make a difference. It tires me to see that all of the young people who want to go abroad once they finish their school or their university, they just want to go abroad because they can't understand, they can't realize or recognize they can't recognize any hope for themselves in their own country. And this is tiring for them, this is tiring for us as theologians, as church leaders. And so in general, I can describe, or maybe this is a personal description, this victimization narrative, which Dr. Accad talked about, is over with youth because they're tired, they're like khalas. But this leads to two options. A rare portion of them will be resilient and will put their foot and they will say that, okay, we want to do a change. We're done. We want to be united. And this, of course, creates a certain stance towards the church. Because for them, the church is part of the sectarian system. And so they cannot understand that the church can help them and being resilient. The second group moves away from being into narratives of victimization, but they enter into a joint narrative of victimization against the sectarian system. And so when they see themselves united, whether Christians or Muslims, united together against the sectarian system, they see themselves as victims, and then they are hopeless. And so we have two groups, let's say. We have youth who are hopeless in the back, behind us, and we have resilient youth beyond us maybe, who don't see us, theologians or church leaders, as potential change makers or peacemakers in the society.
Is there any third path somehow between?
Well, there could be, but those two categories mainly sum up the situation for the youth. And so this is why I really think that as church leaders, we have to work both ways. We have to go back and plant hope in those youth that have lost hope, in showing that we can help them make peace and we can help them change their country. Because we believe that youth are the future generation and they can do what they need to do. And on the other direction, we can move forward and somehow through our work, through our ministry, and of course through the providence of God, help the youth who are resilient see that we are with them and not against them. And so they can maybe work with us, count on us, so that we can make Lebanon a nicer place for everyone.
Path of transformation in a way.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your comment. Thank you very much. So now I would like to invite you to discuss a few minutes on your table. You're sitting together. What you have heard. What is in your mind and heart now? And afterwards, we will be an opportunity for you to ask your questions. And if you find English difficult, please write your questions down in German. You find some cards on the tables. Anneke Schilling, she's sitting here, will translate your question in English. So don't hesitate to write your questions down in German. But now, just a few minutes time also for our audience in the live stream. Just 5 minutes around for you, for the table to discuss. What have you heard? What are your impressions? Yes, everybody, we are searching for some questions. We are open the floor for everyone. Helge, please.
I have the microphone and the power to ask the first question. I see that all of you were discussing intensively, and maybe there's the most urgent question that would like to go first. Who dares?
You can read it. Yes. This is a question from Uwe. You spoke about... From all of us, yes.
Let's move to the next table.
Dr. Martin, you spoke about transforming the narrative of self-victimization and moving beyond that. But the question arose, how can one overcome self-victimization while at the same time recognizing the legitimate rights of the victims, of those who became actually victims and could be objectively victims?
Yeah, great question. So distinguishing between victim and victimized is similar to distinguishing between being a minority and being minoritized or minoritizing oneself. I think one answer lays in this concept of adversity-activated development, where the adversity, which is the experience of victimhood, it leads to actually growth. So this is going beyond resilience. Resilience is, resisting, but adversity-activated development actually growing through suffering, growing through adversity. And if I want to differentiate then between being a minority, which is an objective reality. I mean, in Lebanon, Christians are 30%, in Palestine, 2%, in Egypt, less than 10%, in Syria, also 2%, 1% now. Who wants to add? No, okay. So objectively, we are very small. But when, for instance, our European friends start to say, we want to defend or we want to protect Christians in the Middle East, they are minoritizing me because they are affirming that I don't belong there, that I need help from the outside. So deminoritization is to seek allies within my society and together to resist the process of minoritizing. Now, you were asking more about victimization, but I use minoritization because a victim also, you are objectively a victim. You have been persecuted. You have experienced Islamophobia, you've experienced anti-Semitism, you've experienced persecution, but do you remain there and are resilient, are able to continue and to suffer through it? Or do you use this in order to become an activist in active resistance against those evils in society by finding allies in other faiths who also refuse this dehumanization, and therefore then you form together an alliance in order to fight against those evils in society? So this is what I would see as AAD, and this is what I would see as deminoritizing, de-victimizing the discourse and narrative.
Thank you. Yeah. We continue, please.
Thank you, Dr. Accad, for your vivid presentation, and it was quite an insight into Lebanese society. But I have to be quite frank here, I'm pretty pessimistic. If I zoom out on Lebanon and have a look from above, so isn't it the case that Lebanon is governed by money? I mean, it's like a super stereotype, which I'm putting here now, but I was at Nest for a year, so I'm an alumni. And I've seen that people, if they have money, they have access to elite universities, so they don't share classroom with people who have a different socioeconomic background, first of all. And during your presentation, I like the idea of transformation and public theology, and how can we bring things together to work for the common good. But isn't it the case that, especially in Lebanon, something like a truth and reconciliation commission has to be taken place, like in South Africa, like in Morocco, they tried it. And I think there was an impact. I guess there was an impact. And if I'm not mistaken, it's not quite clear till today who was in response for the blast of the chemicals in the harbor. I think there's not a uniting narrative in that. And I'm also wondering, who are these change makers? I mean, everyone is going, there's a big brain drain, and definitely you need for a change makers, but who will be these change makers?
There's a big question.
You want me to answer shortly? I want
him to answer shortly. But
as a theologian, be short about my answer. Yeah. Okay. So let me go straight to the truth and reconciliation, because that's something I've done a lot of thinking and acting about. The process of truth and reconciliation and the model of South Africa is not possible in Lebanon. First, because we are 35 years after the end of the conflict, so between 35 and 50, if you count the 15 years of civil war. So it's not possible to use a judicial process of truth and reconciliation. Also because in 1991, the former warlords who had become members of parliament and ministers until today, same ones, actually issued for themselves a general amnesty law. So they forgave themselves for all their war crimes within a year of the end of the civil war. So you can't actually go back and revisit these. There are some loopholes in the law, but that's more complicated. So what we are doing, what I've been involved in the past 4 years, is truth and reconciliation from a historian's perspective. And so we are reconstructing narratives of war on specific events and using those conflicting and competing narratives in order to facilitate dialogue and reconciliation between different factions of Lebanese society. We're discovering that people above 50, for instance, remember differently from those under 35, and so there are different approaches. If you're interested to explore more, you can look at truthandreconciliationlebanon.org, and there are now 4 modules that were developed there related to
And what's
the
about the
civil war.
money, which is overwhelming everything?
Yeah, well,
The elite and...
unfortunately, you're looking at a country which is very capitalist in its educational system. So I think in Europe, in Germany and other countries in Europe, you have a more socialist approach to education.
Somehow.
Yeah, it's changing, but and the UK completely moved to a more capitalist approach some years ago. But the point is that so it's actually practically impossible to get a decent education without paying quite a bit of money. So I understand what you're saying about you don't want to share the classroom. So if you want to share the classroom with any Lebanese, you have to revive the Lebanese university system. And I hope that we will move in this direction, but it's very, very challenging.
Yeah. Thank you. The floor is still open.
Otherwise, I might have a question that relates to the question of our guest, and that is, where does this critique on money and corruption fit into your presentation on interreligious or interfaith work? Like, it sounds to me almost like there's some activism that I didn't see in your presentation. Where would it fit?
Yeah, I mean, I covered such a large breadth of topics that I kind of also only scratched the surface of many things. But as we think about public theology, we have to think about economics, we have to think about a theology of poverty, of social justice, of economic justice, and of servant leadership. All of these concepts that are deeply biblical and that challenge the status quo of our social economics. Yeah, certainly they have a very important place.
Pater Gaby asked a relationship between evangelism and dialogue. It was not quite clear, as he mentioned, for him, and I would like to address this question to you, how you would put this relationship.
So you have to forgive me because I come from this more conservative background, and so when I use these concepts, I'm speaking a lot to a different branch of the Protestant church in Lebanon, which is quite sizable, and we cannot ignore, that's really an elephant in the room when you speak in the Protestant church. Even in some of the mainline churches in Lebanon and Syria and Egypt, I don't know if my colleagues agree, but within the church there's very much this struggle with this question, and I think that we cannot ignore the place of evangelism in the Protestant churches, particularly in my part of the world, and therefore you have to draw people out of the polemical approach to evangelism, bring it back to the importance of witness and the Christ-centered witness, which I think can bring the two traditions within Protestant Christianity together at the place where your focus is Christ, his teaching, his values, rather than an attempt at stealing people out of a religion and placing them in the other, and which is why I insist on the idea of Christ-centeredness, supra-religiousness, which needs, I admit, much more explanation, but I just mentioned it in passing.
It means to be in dialogue and in midst the dialogue to be a witness of my own.
So also I think
what I believe.
I think one thing we don't give enough importance to is what I elaborated a little bit about, which is that any conversation is an attempt at convincing. Okay, so to ignore the fact that when we're talking about religious stuff, I would love to see you agree with me, and therefore it might have implications on your life, is not very honest. And so every every conversation, I would not speak, we would not be speaking to each other if we weren't trying to draw the other person more close or closer to my opinion on a subject. And therefore the matter is, as I said, you know, am I using coercion? Am I using violence in language? Am I using manipulation rather than, or am I being open, honest, and also am I willing to learn and to get closer to what you are talking, to your position on an issue? And so this would be honest dialogue, witness, which can lead sometimes to changing my position, which is a form of conversion.
All right.
Yes. Thank you for your concept of charismatic approach. Yes, from my point of experience, it's I'm always more respected if my belief is authentic, and it's authentic if it's prophetic. Yes. What interested me was what does it mean, Christ, not Christianity? I remember I have close contact to Reinhold Bernhard, and I think many of us have, and I think his idea is similar to that. For him, Christ is a role model in this Christian theology towards Islam. Is that the same idea?
I'm not familiar with him, but let me say that it also has context. So, in the region of the Middle East and in Lebanon, if you say I am a Christian, you're not just making a statement about some private spiritual inclination. You're actually making a political and a social declaration. If you say I'm a Christian, the next question is, are you Maronite or are you Orthodox? Or are you supportive of Samir Geagea or of Michel Aoun, you know, the two, at one point, the two main representatives of Maronite politics or political Maronitism. So, because religion is something lived in community, and so if you are making that statement, you are making a sociopolitical declaration. And it's not wrong. So, you know, I'm not Jewish, you know, Jesus was a Jew, he was a rabbi, he was highly respected. The question, can we also be self-critical from within, and does the religious institution encapsulate our identity, or is our identity elsewhere?
Thank you. One more question we could hear and hopefully answer.
Thanks for your lecture. My question is, how did the 2 years of war influence the sectarian system? Did you realize some changes within the system and the players?
Which 2 years?
Of war. 2 years of war now.
The last 2 years.
The last 2 years?
The last 2 years, yes.
I don't know if it impacted sectarianism. It kind of brought to an end the era of political Shi'ism because of the very strong losses that Hezbollah underwent. So we are at a turning point in Lebanon now. I feel very comforted or hopeful by the fact that the current president and prime minister are probably two of the best politicians we've had in the last 50 years. And they come from outside the corrupt system, and they come with international experience and recognition. And so I think there is a chance that because we are at a turning point, we're able to move in some more hopeful directions, because Lebanon has kept missing chances. You know, at the end of the civil war, we should have gone to Truth and Reconciliation, South Africa style. In 2005, at the assassination of Hariri, we should have come out of political Sunnism, and with the Cedar Revolution, that's what it was called at the time, actually established foundations for a new state. We missed that. We reconverted sectarianism. We went into 20 years of political Shiism, which has now come to an end a few months ago. What are we going to do about it, and what's the church going to contribute to this time of change? So the deep sectarianism is still there. I'm not sure that the deeply seated sectarianism is not. When we see it in elections, people, you know, as much as they talk, they end up aligning again with their sect because there's a concept of tribal, you know, your tribal leader looks after you, and there's no real sense of citizenship and the sense of a common good. So these concepts have to be constructed from the ground up. And there are efforts that are being done, but it's a lot of work. But that's why also I think NEST has to do public and political theology, because it's crucial. We need to train the leaders, which in the next 20 years will make a difference in these areas.
This is a kind of messianic view, but we'll still live with you.
Messianic?
Yeah.
The messianic complex.
Not as a complex, but as a hope.
So not only us, but also us. Otherwise, the church's witness is lost.
Thank you very much, Martin, for answering and being among us. Thank you for our audience here that we could share the questions and your answers. An intensive and very stimulating evening comes to an end. We might sit together a little bit more for a couple of time. You have to say how long we have the possibility to be here. And I'd like to thank again the Protestant Academy and the Evangelical Mission in Solidarity for their cooperation. Thank you very much for all of them who joined through live stream. And special thanks to our guests and friends from Lebanon. Of course, for your lecture, Martin, and for the discussion and for the comments and inputs of Pater Gaby, Gaby, of Wimma, Nasella, Professor Wimma Nasella, and of George. Thank you very much. This was very impressive for us. We have heard social and religious actors play a major role in this battle against the spread of hatred and dehumanization of the other. If people of faith and living conscience do not stand up and call our religion and our people back to common goods and values and commitments of love, of justice, peace, and mutual respect, even forgiveness, who will? Martin Luther King said it well: I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the way our world is made. No individual or nation can stand boasting of being independent. We are interdependent. Thank you all for being with us here on site and in the live stream. Have a safe journey home. Thanks for being with us.